I'll try and keep a straight face. Okay. We're live. We're live. We're live. It's Shooting the Shit, Aussie Craft Distillers. For those who don't know, it's Luke, aka Bostic, the Todd. Todd, he's just come up from the basement. And you have to go down and get something down the basement later. And then and our guest for the night, Ian Smitty from a Tin Shed in South Australia. Smitty, how are you, mate?
Old, fat, poor, sore, overworked, underpaid, undersick.
Never ask.
Going deaf, going blind.
Oh, never ask.
Good. So good.
Yeah.
Still upright.
That helps.
Well, it sounds like you need a drink, and it sounds like we all need a drink. Todd, do you want to go down to the basement and see what's down there? Right. So I'll start what I'm going to be drinking tonight. So I bought to the table, because we're South Australian tonight, I bought where's the thing? 78 degrees. Right down there. 78 degrees. A South Australian whiskey. And just a little wee rum. Here's the camera. That looks familiar, Smitty.
Which rum is it?
It's about 2 years old, this one. It's a Requiem.
Yeah, but what's the name on the panel?
Yeah, you can't see.
I can't see any of my glasses. Jesus.
So this is the SS Ferret.
Yeah, the Ferret.
That's really, really nice rum. Yep.
Yeah. I quite like it. It's definitely a rum you have in moderation. You can't have a lot of it. It's a classic sipping rum. This one, isn't it?
Needs practice, Crafty. I managed to drink a couple of bottles of it.
Right, so we're going to have a lot of honesty tonight, people.
Yeah.
Smitty's on. We're going to have a lot of honesty. All right, what are you on?
So we've also got the hemp gin, which I thought was an interesting start. I went to Gin Palooza on the weekend.
Yeah, right.
And got pretty trolleyed and tasted an awful lot of gin. And this one was one of the most interesting, because they distilled the various terpenes out of the cannabis and then infuse it, and it gives different flavors. And it's all legal.
It's illegal.
It's legal.
Legal.
It's all legal.
It's all legal, not illegal.
It is not illegal.
Not illegal.
Actually, their banner says now legal.
Now legal.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's quite nice.
Tastes like a good gin.
Yeah, it does.
Todd, what do you got, mate?
Is it Tria Prima? Another South Australian thing.
It's a shandy.
Shandy.
Having a wee shandy. A wee shandy tonight, eh?
Oh, these are cool looking bottles.
That is
I
nice.
have met the girl who was the model for that label. Delightful young woman.
I'm sure she was.
Yeah, a lot of work went into that design. I remember when when Shandy released it, it was like, wow, that label really popped. And you've seen it. It's impressive.
I have. It is impressive.
Yeah,
very much so.
All right, well, let's get into it. So let's kick it off with Smitty. You've been on the scene for quite a while on the Australian spirits scene. What if you say Bill and Casey and Spike were first wavers? What waiver do you think you were? When did you come on the scene?
Not long after. We got our first license to distill in 2004.
Yeah.
So I'm not even sure Casey, I don't even think Overeem Distilling was around at then. I'm not sure. But David Baker was around. And we started distilling either the week before or the week after Cameron signed at Limeburners. I forget which. But we started with a business called Southern Coast Distillers, and we had an extra pair of partners. They turned out to be not too good for the business, so we tried to buy them out, but they didn't like that. and they sued us, and we finished up in court. And his parting gift was to handle the whole business to a liquidator, which is the worst thing he could have done from our perspective. They're just thieving bastards. But we just started again from scratch in 2013. Yeah.
Right. So you are a first waver then. You're definitely, you're a first waver. So the scene back then, the landscape back then, compared to the landscape now, I mean, there's resources, just so much resources you can access nowadays as a new distillery. But back then, there wouldn't have been resources. I mean, the internet was barely running at that point. So
I'm not that bloody old, thanks. But you're right, there wasn't a real lot available.
Imagining your little feet running underneath your car.
So how did you do it? How did you research it? And how did you put it all together?
Well, it started because Vic and I were leaning on the school fence one day, back when our kids were in reception, and my oldest son's now 29. So that was a while ago. And Vic was working as a postman. And he told me that he had been delivering some mail that day to a homebrew shop, and they had a still for sale. And he was going to buy it because he wanted to make some vodka because he's Russian, or at least his parents were Russian.
Right.
And I said, don't bother. I've got a still at home. I inherited it from my father, who in turn inherited it from his father. It's a copper laboratory pot still from an old brewery up in the Adelaide Hills at Woodside. Wow. So a few days later, he turned up on the doorstep with 50 or 60 litres of fermented something, and we tried to turn it into alcohol. The wife was out at the time, which was handy. The kids were upstairs in bed, and they slept very soundly because more alcohol finished up in the air and the vapour than finished up in the sea. And it was over an open flame, so how we didn't kill ourselves got me stuffed. But when the wife came home a few hours later, she just about fell over when she walked through the door because the air was thick with the vapours of alcohol. Anyway, that's how it started.
Did you do it on the kitchen table, did you?
Kitchen stove, yeah.
Kitchen stove, right. Okay, best place to do it, yeah.
And we had the kitchen tap hooked up to the condenser and handmade condenser out of PVC pipes. It was pretty rugged, leaks everywhere, as you'd be familiar with, Crafty. Anyway, one day I came home from work complaining that my body was hurting from digging holes in the ground, because what I used to do was make flagpoles and install them.
Yeah.
And the bride said, stop your bloody whinging. Do something more sedentary that doesn't hurt as much. And I said, like what? It was a gas stove, yeah. And I said, well, she said, make whiskey. And even now she says it's the only thing she's never had to tell me to do twice. So we're making whiskey as a result of her input. Yeah, it's a lot more fun than flagpoles.
I imagine so.
Yeah.
Do you still do flagpoles, or did you give that away? I know up till recently you were doing it, weren't you?
I sold the flagpole business 2 years ago, or 2 and a bit years ago. The bloke's paying me off on the drip, and he's got a little bit to go, but I'm nearly there. And flagpoles was fun. You met a lot of nice people. You had lots of big erections, etc. But as it turned out, you've put one flagpole together and put it up, you've put 100 or 1,000. It's no different. It's repetitive. A bit like standing in front of the still, actually. Turned out
that's the biggest secret. That's the biggest secret in the industry.
Biggest secret.
What, that it's a boring, repetitive, blue-collar job?
No, it's a magical thing. It's fairy dust and penguins. It's magical. That's
so much for humanising.
Yeah.
I know you stand for the still, but we go off and do other stuff. We do have a few basic rules, one of which is only do one thing at a time.
Yeah.
We will distill and do other things at a time because the still just runs in the background. And if there's a problem, you work it out pretty quickly. Yeah. We only do one thing at a time.
Either hear it, smell it, or feel it.
Yeah. Or see it. But there's been a few accidents in distilleries in the last year or two, so safety is something I'm becoming overly conscious of, especially because we're building a new distillery to move into in the next few months.
Right, okay. So what will that give you? A lot more capacity, or?
It'll give us a little bit more floor space and a lot more profile because it's in the middle of the Adelaide Hills. It's in a tourist area. It's hooked onto the side of the shopping centre. So by the time we've got a cellar door and a bit of music and that sort of thing happening, it should do wonders for our sales, because the average small distiller sells about 50 to 60% of their turnover comes from cellar door sales. We don't have a cellar door, so we're looking at doubling our sales when we get one. That'll be nice.
Yeah,
that would be nice.
Yeah, it's. I mean, just speaking from our experience, when we started doing cellar door, and the cellar door for us is putting the roller door up when I'm milling, brewing, distilling, or whatever. But it was a game changer. Because people come up, they experience it, they want to hear it, they want to taste it, and they want to buy it. And that's interesting that you said 50 to 60% of sales from cellar door.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
We don't have that at the moment. We're in the western suburbs of Adelaide, in an industrial area next door to a rubbish dump, and we use Adelaide tap water. So everything going against us by convention, what the Scots would have you believe, but we still managed to make good whiskey.
You humanise the art of whiskey, my friend.
Thank you. I think that was a compliment.
That was a compliment. Yeah.
I hope it's a compliment. We've been doing it for years now.
So going back to your inherited still, had you had any experience with it before that day? Or you just sat there?
When I was a teenager, I used to work for my father, who was a cider maker. And he was in business with a bloke called Peter Lehman. You may have heard of him, one of the barons of the Barossa.
Yeah, sort of know him. Yeah.
They decided to make some Calvados one day, which was to distill cider and make apple brandy.
Yeah.
And we totally stuffed it up. It was horrible. It was foul. The barrel was made by a bloke called Eric Woodlock, who ran an engineering business called W.A. Schmidt Proprietary Limited. And my father was his apprentice back in the war days, it would have been the late 40s. And his hobby was to make barrels. He did cooperage as a hobby. I've still got the barrel the old man used, actually. And but it wasn't toasted. In fact, I'm not even sure it wasn't lined with wax. It did nothing for the Calvados. And Peter Lehman's recollection was that, with this distilling game, you throw away the first bit, the 10%, that's called the heads, and you throw away the last 10%, that's the tails, with the wood alcohol in them. And what I know now, compared to what I knew then, I go, oh, Jesus Christ, no wonder it tasted terrible.
Is that why he went into wine rather than staying with distilling?
Say again, please?
Is that why he went into wine rather than staying with spirits?
Probably. He did pretty well in wine, but the wine course did teach distilling at Roseworthy back, which is where they used to run that course. They now run it at Kuwait here in town. But very, very little time was devoted to distilling. And every small winery in Adelaide had a still in it because they used to make their own fortifying spirit for making brandy. But that all died back in the 50s, I think, when they changed the excise rates.
Yeah. And just on that now, with the landscape, with what's happening with distilleries. So when I started, there was like 60 distilleries. There's now like 420. I think that's the latest count. Yeah, about 420. So you're seeing breweries now starting to go, hey, we make beer, we understand our malts. Let's get a still and let's make whiskey. And I think you're seeing the same thing starting to happen with wineries too, aren't they? They're going, well, we make our own wine, so we can make our own neutral, so we can distill. So what are you seeing that in your wine regions in South Australia?
Yeah, there's a few wineries now making gin. There's a few breweries setting up distilleries, most notable being Cooper's.
Yes.
They announced last week spending $50 million to build a distillery.
Yeah.
Barrel storage, microbrewery, and cellar door experience. They will do it properly, and that'll be good for us in South Australia because they will attract a lot of interest. And as Billy Lark would always say, a rising tide floats all boats.
Absolutely.
Coopers won't stuff it up. They'll do a good job.
And the thing with Coopers too is, how many of us learned how to brew with Coopers kits?
Yeah.
They are the original craft beer. So they've got such a solid brand. And for them to go into whiskey, straight away, it's a recognizable brand. And as you said, they won't stuff it up.
It's interesting you refer to them as a craft brewery because they are quite large. I did a tour there a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And I took a little video of their labelling machine on their bottling line.
Yeah.
It runs at 120 bottles a second.
Jesus.
It's just a blur.
Mm.
And there's not a person in the brewery. The only man in the brewery is the bloke who fans the labels to make sure they don't stick together when he loads the labelling machine. And there's one guy who loads trucks. They unload the bottles off the trucks, the empty bottles automatically, goes through the filling machine and the washing and everything else automatically, goes through the labelling machine automatically, goes through a packing machine that packs it in 6 packs and then packs it in 24 packs. It gets dosed with sugar as it goes through the bottling machine, and there's a laser-driven, computer-controlled forklift that picks it up and stacks it on in a particular shelf somewhere so they know where to find it 2 weeks later when it's finished fermenting. It is just awesome to watch. It's really impressive.
So I think it's fair to say there's not much room for career advancement on the floor then, is it?
And the other problem is that when people work there, they tend to stay there. We've just released a whiskey called Sticky Fingers, which was made with malt extract given to us by Coopers.
Right.
4 years ago, a bloke called Nick Sterenberg, who's their operations manager, I'd met him at a conference and he walked in and he said, you mind if I come and say hello and have a look? I said, yeah, sure. And he said, can you make whiskey from malt extract? And I said, yeah, I've actually done it. You can. Bloody expensive way to make whiskey, but it makes a nice product. And a few days later, a pallet of expired, out of date malt extract turned up.
Right.
And he said, go for it. So we made, we got enough to fill a 200-litre barrel plus a 50-litre barrel out of it. And we bottled the 200-litre barrel a few weeks ago. And I dropped off a couple of cases to Coopers. And we launched Sticky Fingers last week, I think. And it's really nice. In fact, when you buy a bottle of Sticky Fingers, we put a little miniature Mars bar in there. Because malt extract is in Mars bars and Cooper's homebrew kits, and that's about the only place you find it.
Right.
And I tell you now, Mars bar and whiskey goes really well.
Now I'm going to have to get some.
That's actually one of Ian's tricks at whiskey shows.
Mm.
So he'll set up at a whiskey show, and the very first thing he does is he sets up a bowl of chocolate.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
And he entices people over with the chocolate and goes.
Doesn't take much.
Exactly right.
So you're giving away free chocolate and whiskey. I think that's going to be a no-brainer, really.
It's a match made in heaven.
Little tiny bits of chocolate, about the size of a 10-cent piece. Vic, my partner, makes it and dusts it with orange. But the other issue with these people setting up small distilleries is safety. We had 2 accidents in distilleries in the last year.
Yep.
And there was one just a couple of weeks ago where a still blew up right next to a party of people having a gin tasting. Very unattractive.
Yeah.
So the tax office, I just helped a Chinese guy who can't speak English get a license, a manufacturer's license from the tax office. He has not got a clue how to make alcohol. So there's all these people, 400 now, as you said, and more every day, getting licenses awarded to them by the tax man to go out and produce a product. They could blow themselves up along the way. They could poison their customers. Who knows what's going to go on? There's no education or minimum requirements for running a distillery.
Yeah.
They give you a car. You've got to spend 6 or 8 months learning how to drive it and spend a small fortune.
Yeah.
Even more now.
Yeah. If you want to be a brewer, you've got to go and do courses and get tickets. But if you want to be a distiller, just buy the still and go for it. And
just pay the taxes.
So at the and Smitty was there at the Australian Distillers Association conference. Adam Pinkard from Adams Distillery stood up, and he was the first speaker of the day from memory, and he just told the story of the horrific, horrible situation that occurred at Adams with the accident. And it was, you look at it and you go, it was a sequence of events that led to that tragedy, right? And it sent a chill down everyone's spine who listened to Adam, and I know a lot that went back to their distilleries, including us, and just looked at what we do and go, things can happen, right? Even with the best one in the world and the best systems, things can still go wrong. But you've got to have a safety focus. You've got to be looking at everything you do, because there is no room for margin in what we do, is there?
Not a lot, no.
No, exactly right. So
there's an interesting question, actually. The application process requires proof of experience, doesn't it? Or it did in 2016.
I think the thing I did for this Chinese bloke the other day, it required not proof, but a statement of what experience or that you had. Yeah, but
correct. Yeah,
Yeah. So a statement. Right.
Yeah. So it could be as simple as doing a course, a whiskey course, or running a still course, or an online course, or spending time at a distillery, or that. But there's no actual requirement to provide evidence or anything like that. So
Interestingly enough, when I went to that conference, I spent 8 hours in the car with Professor Graham Jones each way.
Exciting.
And also and Vic. That was quite entertaining. But what Graham said in one of the conversations, and there were many, we got a dissertation on the beauties of vacuum distilling and everything else you can imagine, because he was only too happy to share his knowledge.
Yeah.
But one of the things he said was, in setting up the course that the Adelaide University runs on Introduction to Distillery or Distilling, he said he researched the courses on offer at Harriet Watt University and IBD and a few other places, and none of them have much of an emphasis on safety. There's very little taught on safety. And I think it's beholding to the ADA maybe to step up and organise someone to do it, if not ourselves and someone else, to have a basic course required that gives you some sort of qualification, that nothing else that makes you aware of.
I know that I'm doing the IBD at the moment, and there's definitely a full module on safety nowadays.
Yeah,
so they are.
Yeah.
And when I did it 3 years ago, or whatever, 4 years ago, I can't recall any specific module on safety. It was sort of integrated with other topics, I think. Safety and handling, that's what it was. Yeah. But but I suppose when you look at like Scotland, for example, Smitty, I suppose there's a lot of distilleries where there's a lot of automation too, isn't there? Whereas in Australia, a lot of running stills, and it's very, very hands-on and tweaking and
a lot of Scottish distilleries are hands-on too, but you might have one bloke running 6 stills, and the same way they run it for the last 50 years. I've heard some interesting stories of people chasing flames across the floor of still rooms in Scotland with a bucket of water or a bucket of sand in their hand. And looking down the side of the still and seeing the flames underneath, which is the problem they had at Adams Distillery. There was a naked flame underneath, and they were filling the still with a bucket, using a bucket to put neutral spirit into the still. And the bucket caught on the edge of the manhole as going in and spilt a bit, and it ran down the outside of the still to the flames, and that was the start of it. You should probably never use a bucket, certainly never when there's a flame underneath your still.
No, that's a hard lesson to learn, that one, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's because people are familiar with the job and they take shortcuts.
Yeah.
And this one that blew up the other day in Victoria, I haven't yet got the story on how that happened, but I've seen a few photos. It was only quite a small still, fortunately, but it buggered the still.
Did it?
Yeah.
Right.
I need to do a search on that one.
Let's talk about something more pleasant. What would you like to talk about?
Yeah. Okay. So I recall 2 things relating to you that directly tie you to me. So number one was I know. One was I was looking for a still, and I had no idea apart from Nap Lure. No idea at all, right? And I saw a photo that you posted on social media, and your new still was on the back of a truck, and you guys were unloading it. And
actually
so again?
was actually a car trailer.
Car trailer, yes. And it was a Burnsy still. Mark Burns from Burns Welding Fabrication in Griffith. And so that was the first time I became aware of Mark, made contact and went from there. And now he's a good friend, good mentor, and makes amazing stills. It really does. And the other thing that tied me is we were in Tassie together, and it was the Whiskey Club event from memory.
The quiz night.
It was a quiz night, but it was something else. But you were the guy who coined the term crafty. I had not heard it until then, and I got on the bus and you went, crafty. And I went, I don't know if I like that, the sounds of that.
You were starting to be suspicious. Because it's got more than one meaning.
I know. But you are credited with the creation of it. So.
You've managed to spin it to me, craft worker. It's meant to be a crafty, sneaky bastard.
No. It's all a front, yeah.
You've done a good job.
You know the truth.
The truth comes out.
Yeah, that was that was funny.
Well, you've certainly leaned into it.
Yeah, well, I've had to. Had no choice.
Yeah.
There's no patent or trademark around it though.
What, you haven't looked at that yet? I reckon you have.
Crafty's too broad.
Too broad, right? Just to go back to really to our bit of a downer topic earlier, but
we're trying to get out of it.
I know, but there's been some really it has actually brought out a lot of comments, and Andrew Young has said that they were never allowed to use mobile phones, spark causing tools, torches, static discharge, even lightning protection for bonds. So there obviously is a bit of knowledge out there. It's just where that's coming from. Here we go. The ATO, Jonathan Harris says his ATO official hands-on experience was brewing beer. That was it.
Wow. Yeah.
Well, the go-to publication on this is called AS 1940, Australian Standard 1940. And you've got to find a copy of that somewhere, because otherwise you're going to pay for it. It's not cheap. Yeah. And it's really good because it puts you to sleep quickly. It's very dry reading. I think when I read it, it took me 3 nights to get from front to back, and it's only that thick.
Because it's very absorbent?
It's scary as all shit because of the expense of the things you've got to put in, according to AS 1940. But then I'm talking to an architect day before yesterday, and he says, AS 1940 isn't the be-all and end-all. The real be-all and end-all is the building codes. And it's only if the building codes refer to AS 1940 that you've got to follow it. So contradictory perspectives from different people. But it's AS 1940 is designed for, paint thinners producers. It's designed for petroleum refineries and that sort of stuff, where the risk is a lot greater than we've got. But nonetheless, we've still got the risks. We do have vapors, and they can get to explosive levels. I'd suggest everyone get a hold of those 1940, have a read. But those other issues of static electricity, someone, I can't remember who, was telling me that the German steelmaker recommended that because the distillery was collecting their spirits in a plastic drum, that they earth the plastic drum with a copper rod to an earth wire, because the static collected by the liquid as it comes out of the spirit. Well, there can be static. And I've seen a video of an IBC self-ignite when they open the tap, and toluene, which is a product used it used to be used in dry cleaning. I don't know what it's used in now. It was banned because it was carcinogenic. But as the toluene was rushing out of the tap, the static electricity caused the toluene to self-ignite. And there's this blue flame shooting out the bottom of the IBC.
Wow.
So bloody hell. Risk. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, so as Brian says, we better all sort it out, otherwise we won't be able to afford insurance.
It's a possibility. There's only about 2 insurance companies that underwrite distilleries in Australia. There's QBE and CGU, I think, and maybe Lloyd's. And they can be quite demanding in what they set down in order to make the as requirements in order to make the insurance affordable.
Yeah. Right. Let's move forward. Let's move forward into the positive landscape ahead of us, which is the Australian whiskey landscape. I'd like to talk about particularly, and I'd like to talk about in South Australia with the what is it, SANSPA, the South Australian Spirits Association.
South Australian Spirit Producers Association.
Right. So they've got an association. Mm-hmm. In New South Wales, we have no association, and we got our ass kicked, and rightly so, at the conference, because all states are very active on association fronts, right? Mm-hmm. And coordinating activity and dialing into local government and having a voice with local government. And you guys in South Australia have done it really well. It's not just whiskey, it's spirits in general. So I'll come back to my whiskey comment shortly. But can you just give us a bit of a rundown, Smitty, on how that started and how effective it's been so far?
I actually missed the start because I'm involved with the national body, and I'm not very involved with the state body. But there's a couple of blokes here, Sasha LaForgia from 78 Degrees, Georgiadis from Never Never. And they're pretty much get up and go type blokes, and they got together with the other distillers and started an association, and I am a member of it. And they got a grant from the government through political connections, I suppose. A little bit of money to do a website and a distillery trail and produce a publication. And then we got another little grant, actually quite a big grant, to provide a blueprint for the way the industry was going to move forward with tourism and connecting with production and exports. And we did have a bloke called David Ridgway, who was the minister for, what was he minister for?
Silly Walks?
I can't remember now, but he was a good bloke, and he was very interested in doing something for this industry, agriculture, that's what he was.
Right.
He finished up he left the government and he retired, and he's finished up as the South Australian equivalent of our ambassador to trade in the UK. So he's on site in the UK. We've got we had a premier here called Stephen Marshall, who got all the distillers around to his house for a feed and a drink at the premier's house. Not his office or his function centre, but in his actual living room.
Right.
He was very much on site. And in fact, I remember him complaining that he hadn't been asked to be a judge in the local gin competition. Quite liked his spirit. But I believe that the new premier is also pretty keen on his gin. So what's happened is a couple of individuals got together and they worked out how to network with the government and get some contacts in the government, and worked out how to play the political game and the grants game. And it's going from strength to strength.
Yeah, it seems to be, and all the states are powering along on that front, and it's the tourism angle is a big angle too, isn't it? It's a
big money earner.
Yeah, exactly.
The Tasmanian whiskey industry is worth a lot of money to Tasmania. Yeah. Our whiskey industry isn't yet worth a lot of money, but I think the spirits we produce here are every bit as good as the stuff you get out of Tasmania, and a damn sight cheaper. We produce world-class gins here. There's quite a few of the producers have won world's best gin or whatever in some competition. Yep. So we are getting a reputation for being the gin state, and that may even appear in our number plate soon, which is probably a sad thing. But we're already the wine state, and we've got good connections, and we've seen how the wine industry developed 30 or 40 years ago, and there's still plenty of people around who were instrumental in making that happen. So it's very easy to follow in their footsteps. It's a lot easier to follow in their footsteps than just to forge the path yourself. Same as we've had it easy because we've followed in Bill Lark's footsteps. He did the hard yards. He got the law changed, and he made it acceptable for Australian whiskey to be a product and to actually exist. So because he did that hard work, it's easier for us. his brother John in Kangaroo Island did KI Spirits and the gin there. And because he did that and he got some accolades, it made it easier for everybody else to do it.
Yeah, you were going to say something, Luke?
Well, I was just thinking, so that certainly would be the role of the associations to help foster that growth in the individual states and help foster the governmental change, such as the excise. Obviously, wine has a much lower excise than spirits does.
Wine doesn't have excise at all. It's got wine equalisation tax, which is based on the wholesale value of the wine, which was brought about by Senator Birmingham when he was working for the Australian wine industry when they scrapped sales tax and introduced GST. That was going to make the tax collect on wine a lot less, and the government didn't like that. So they came up with this thing called wine equalisation tax, which is not related to the amount of alcohol at all in the product. It's only related to the price of the product. Yeah.
So we really need to get on side with some bigwigs in government and get them to change that. Then
it's a work in progress.
It's a work in progress. A lot's happened already.
And the brewers, to a lesser extent, and Spirits and Cocktails Australia are all trying to get that normalised because the tax we pay is double what the brewers pay, and that's the same thing for ethanol. So it's quite discriminatory against spirit drinkers. And there's more and more spirit drinkers and less beer drinkers and less wine drinkers.
That's based on standard drinks.
Yeah.
So go back to the whiskey then. So when we look at whiskey, the whiskey landscape in Australia now, I see it a couple of ways. And one way I see it is you've got your traditional Scottish approach of making whiskey, right? Of single variety barley, and basically just distilling pale malt or pilsner malt or something like that, right? Going into barrels of port or sherry or bourbon. That's sort of the standards, right? And at the other end of the spectrum, you've got the distillers that are saying, well, we'll take a beer perspective, and the emphasis on beer is a mash bill and how you put a mash bill together. And then also saying what other types of casks we can do. So there's a lot of innovation in both fronts. I think what's happening in Australia, more and more whiskey distillers pushing the envelope. They're trying different things, and it's because of the lack of restrictions we have in Australia and the way that we make our whiskey. But if you have the Scottish style and you have the American style, how do you see it, Smitty? Because you've got a lot of experience and you've seen an evolution of the landscape. So what's your thoughts on it?
Everybody started out making Scottish style whiskey, emulating what the Scots did, because I think the theory was that's the product we like, that's the product we drink. And if we do what the Scots do, it's a good start. We can't go too far wrong. Same as when I started. I started doing everything that Bill Lark did because I figured he made reasonably good whiskey. If we did what he did, then we'd make reasonably good whiskey too. Because you got to remember, we didn't know what we were doing. We read a few books. That was it. In fact, some of the advice I got from people like David Baker was to read as much as you can about everything you can. But back to your story, I'm not one of these people that subscribes to the fact that the mash bill makes a huge difference and the type of grain makes a huge difference. Obviously, if you've got molasses instead of grain, then there's a big difference there. And if you're using corn instead of malt, there's a bit of a difference. But the differences aren't that huge. And most people, when you give them some malt to chew, are quite surprised at how bland it tastes. It's got bugger all flavour. And most of the flavour, as is well publicised, comes from the barrels, and that's what we believe in. But personally, I like Scottish whiskies. I can drink American whiskies, but I'm not a fan. Irish whiskies do nothing for me. Canadian whiskies do nothing for me. I quite like some of the Indians. Japanese whiskies I used to love, but I'm finding them a bit bland now, a bit beige in the Billy Connolly sort of definition of beige. So we are seeing that, and we're seeing things like the 6 malt blend out of Archie Rose. The finished product doesn't taste dramatically different to their standard single malt, to be honest. You've played around with some different mash bills, and I find your whiskey's a bit off the planet for my taste sometimes. I've got one on my desk at work that I made, and that's okay, I think. And I do quite like some of your whiskies, but some of them are just way too off on an extreme for my palate. Yeah. So I think what you're asking really is not so much what people are making as what people are drinking. So if you can make a really wild, heavy, big, beefy sort of flavourful whiskey, a lot of Australians like that. And if you look at their wines, Australians like drinking big red Barossas, big bold Barossa reds, and they like our big bold whiskies too. Yeah. And recently we did Vic and I did a tasting or a ranking in the World Whisky Awards.
Yes.
We were given 14 samples, and we did a Zoom tasting with blokes from the UK and Japan and America and Australia and Northern Europe, Denmark and Germany.
Right.
And we had a whiskey come up that was 40%, and I tasted it and sculled it nearly, and they said, "What do you think of that, Ian?" And I said, "Well, in Australia we call it sex on the beach because it's fucking near water." And these guys from Northern Europe are saying, "Oh no, this is beautiful. It's so delicate and lovely. It's so flavourful." And that was instantly, I thought, well, here's a problem entering competitions. If your whiskey doesn't get in front of the right judge, they're going to write it off, because the ones that I think were Australian whiskies that I loved and the other Australian loved because they're big and bold, these Northern Europeans said, "Oh no, that's rubbish. Can't drink that. Tastes terrible." So different people in different parts of the world have different likes in their tastes, and I think the whiskey will grow to accommodate those tastes. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
If you make an American style whiskey, no one wants to buy it.
No.
Business.
Yeah, so is there any value in the Spirits Awards then, when it is so subjective and it's about getting in front of the right judge, as you say, in order to get a favourable score? Are they a bit pointless?
Yes. A couple of years ago, we had a competition here in Adelaide, and there were 3 whiskies entered which had won gold medals in different competitions in Europe, the US, and I think the UK. And none of those got a gold medal in the whiskey competition here in Adelaide, because there was a very small panel of judges. There's 3 or 4 judges, and if there's a dominant judge who says, "Oh, I really like drinking Ardbeg," and he's the dominant judge, whatever he says is the best, the others will go with. If you do a bigger competition, there might be 30 or 40 judges. So if you do the International Wines and Spirits in San Francisco, or the World Whisky Awards, the World Whisky Awards, they decant. You've got to send 3 bottles off to them. They decant the 50 or 100 ml samples and send them off around the world to their judges. So your whiskey is being judged by a very broad spectrum of palates around the world. And, it evens out. So the people who don't like it will say they don't like it, but there's probably someone else there who really does, and the scores will even out. And it's the same for everybody's whiskey. So if you've got the Northern Europeans who like beige whiskies, when you send that sample to Australia, people are going to mark it down because it's got no flavour. So it all evens out in those bigger competitions with big panels of judges. And when I used to be involved in the Malt Whisky Society's Malt Whisky Awards here in Australia, we used to have 30 judges. And we had a moderator. So there'd be a table of 5 judges, and there'd be split in amongst all the other whiskies would be a common whiskey and maybe 2 of them, so that the different tables and the different judges would score these whiskies differently, not knowing. So you get an index error. So the scores were moderated because this table was consistently half a point lower than that table. So their scores were lifted up half a point. Well, this one was dropped. So there was a bit of science involved in the judging and the moderation and control, and they had control samples as well. Before you start judging, okay, here's a 90-point whiskey, here's an 80-point whiskey, here's a 70-point whiskey. They're over there on the table. Go and refresh your palate halfway through the day and recalibrate your palate.
Geez, that's a shit day, isn't it?
Yeah, well, most of these competitions around Australia don't do that. They haven't yet reached that level of professionalism.
Yeah. Look, the thing with the competitions, it's from this is my own opinion. We enter some comps. We're pretty selective what we do. It's not because we want to enter comps because they're bloody expensive, but there's no question about it. A shiny metal of some sort definitely helps with markets and definitely helps with cellar door. And really, that's about the value, I think.
And the other thing is that if you win, like we picked up Jim Murray's book. We got Southern Hemisphere Whiskey of the Year and Australian Malt of the Year back.
Yeah.
For 2022.
Yeah.
So what? There were 4 other whiskies that scored 96 points in Jim Murray's book. Just because Jim Murray liked ours because it had a bit of peat in it, the other guys missed out. And same quality whiskey, same score, but they don't get the gong for being Southern Hemisphere's best whiskey. And for what? It's not even a point. So really, it's a bit of a one prize. One bloke takes all the prizes away, and it's just not indicative of the quality of the whiskey. So I reckon just give it out to people to taste and let them make up their own minds.
Yeah, it's liquid on lips. Let
I guess
decide.
Dan Woolley, who's one of the most experienced people in the whiskey industry, doesn't even enter competitions.
Yeah, he's made a point of that too.
Yeah. And when you consider it costs probably around $2,000 or a bit more to enter the World Whiskey Awards, you can understand why you don't want to do it too often.
Yeah.
Definitely. Rum.
We would like rum input feedback here, aside from the whiskey gin. Of course, Steve brought that up. Steve brought that one up.
All right, what do you want to know about rum? You're drinking it. You tell me.
I've poured you rum. I'm generally not a rum drinker. For me, I find it very almost astringent. There's an aftertaste to it that I generally don't gravitate to, and I put it down purely to the base spirit being being from
sugar.
Yeah, from molasses rather than
get out more
right. But I would probably also say it's because I've been drinking shit rum.
Yeah, you haven't been drinking sipping rums.
What makes a good rum?
Well, I reckon that one in Crafty's hands, one of the best rums I've ever tasted, probably the best one I've ever made.
It's very complex.
I enjoy it.
Yeah, well, I am enjoying it. As one of my premium, I guess, not Bundy rum experiences.
I don't mind Bundy. I like it. Yeah.
On specific occasions, Bundy's not too bad, but
are they the same occasions that BB is not too bad?
No. Let's talk about Bundy then. Let's talk about Bundy. So Rick Prosser,
all right,
Cakey Moon, right? So Rick used to work at Bundy, right? And he told me the story. So him and a group of guys went to senior management and said, guys, can we make some rum? And they go, what do you mean? They go, can we make some serious rum? Right? Can you allow us to go and get some barrels and make some quality rum? And they did. They gave them a budget and they went off and they made rum, and it was very good. And it did pick up a big gong, world's best rum, a few years ago. And it's now a very profitable little division for Bundy, so that they can make quality rum. Rick left and went and formed his own distillery and making quality gin and other products and rum. He's got rum coming out not too far away, I believe, Ian.
Yeah, that's true. You go back 4 or 5 years and you couldn't buy it. You couldn't get a rum. Sorry, you couldn't sell a rum for over about $70 or $80 max, if that. Yeah. Now I sell that stuff for $140 a bottle and no one blinks.
Yep.
Rum is on the rise. Rum, we started making it because I like rum. We also started, the official excuse was if we had rum, we then had rum barrels. And we could put whiskey in rum barrels to mature. And I've never had a rum barrel mature whiskey I didn't like. They're all good. And also the other thing was we didn't have any chilling equipment on our fermenters. So come summer, we couldn't make whiskey because we just cooked the yeast.
Yep.
But we could make, because we couldn't chill down the wash cold enough to pitch the yeast and have it stay cold without killing the yeast, because our water comes out of our tap at about 35 degrees in summer. So we started making rum in summer as a summer sport, and then we sold some rum, and it was pretty good. That one in your hands, picked up gongs, best Australian rum and that sort of thing. And I like it. It's a nice change. And you really make very good flambe bananas with that.
Ooh.
It is.
That sounds good.
You know how to do it?
What's the secret to making a good rum?
Okay. Well, a good rum or a good flambe banana?
Well, you can start the bananas first.
I'm not really sure with the rum, to be honest with you. We are still trying to work it out, even though we've been making it for a long time, and we've had some really good rums. For us, the indicator, well, the variable is the amount of rum funk, that ester you get, which I think is called ethyl acetate, that sort of acetone overripe banana thing.
Yeah.
Ethyl acetate, that was it.
Ethyl acetate, yeah. Sweet as.
It is to rum what peat is to whiskey.
Yeah.
So some people just love it.
I think that's what I'm on the fence about.
Ethyl acetate.
Personally, yeah.
Well, that one you're drinking now has got next to none in it. But the one we just released the last one we released called the Tom Brennan had a lot of it in there. And not a lot compared to something like a Stroh, that's spelled STROH, made in Poland, which I can't even drink. But some people just love it. And it's the same people who drink that Bruichladdich Optimal. Other people just won't even go near it when you pull the bung because it stinks. So it's just preferences and flavours. But how do you make it? Use good molasses, use the right yeast. Actually, the yeast doesn't matter that much. And the longer you leave it ferment, the more of that ethyl acetate and other esters you get.
Right.
Yeah, because you're getting those esters. Yeah, you're getting those complex ester compounds, and it is a category of rum, isn't it? High esters.
In some competitions,
yeah, and there's some of them are just so sickly sweet and
there's another problem with rum. You get a lot of additives. Some rums have got sugar in them added, some have got port added, and you're sort of allowed to do it because rum's made from sugar, in inverted commas, be it plain spirit, be it molasses, it's sugar. So you're allowed to add that back in if you want to, depending on whose country's rules you're in. But in Australia, we don't seem to have very rigid rules on that sort of thing. So if you want to add sugar back in your rum, it'll be the same as adding malt back into your whiskey. Technically, you can do it because your whiskey's still made from malt. It's just not necessarily fermented.
Yeah. So what makes a good molasses then as a good base?
Didn't have too much other shit in it because molasses is a byproduct of a rum mill. What do they call them? Refinery.
Sugar making.
Yeah, it's a byproduct.
Sugar refinery.
And some of it's only good for animal feed, and some of it they use in food. I can't think what products are made with molasses, but it is sometimes used in cooking, and it's sometimes used in baking.
Right.
Are you using Dunder at all in your rum?
Stop pinching my questions, would you? These guys have a go at me every single week because I don't ask enough questions, and they pinch all the good ones.
And now it's time for Throw the Todd under the bus.
Todd has a question. More than one, I hope.
What is it, Todd?
Do you use Dunder? And if so, I want to get the question. I'm interested in this because
here comes the train.
No, there are people here in Adelaide making rum who do have a small Dunder pit, and the Jamaicans are quite famous for it, and they're also famous for that rum funk that we were talking about earlier. Yep. So you could say that the esters that are produced in the Dunder pit are helping make that high ester ethyl acetate funk in the rum. For those who are listening and don't know what a Dunder pit is, a Dunder pit traditionally is a hole in the ground into which you throw your leftover spent wash from having fermented it, and it gets a bit of bacteria in there, and it has its own growth, and there's a little bit of residual sugar, so there's a bit of wild yeast growing in there, and they use that as a bit of a starter, a bit like a sour mash or sourdough bread.
Don't they also throw in dead people and goats' heads?
Not that I've seen, but I have heard those stories. Yeah.
It doesn't sound like it would pass food safety. Really.
Yeah, that's the problem.
It doesn't.
Distilling fixes a lot of problems. The actual act of distilling at high alcohol fixes a lot of those problems.
Yep. Good point. Right.
What's Stephen McGarry saying there? High bricks, high reducing sugars, low ash or unfermentables. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
He's talking about what's in the molasses, I think.
Yeah. Dunder is backset by another name. Live dunder is a different matter. That is where it's muck and acid. And that's where you've got to manage your dunder pits as far as your pH levels and everything else, don't you? It's a whole different world, really.
I know, I've never delved into it.
Yeah. We had a crack at making rum. We've done it twice. And the first thing was, we bought it in 15-litre tubs, all right? Because we thought this is really sticky shit. How the hell are you going to get it out of a drum? Seemed to flow okay. We filled up our mash tun. We took the screen out, added hot water, and we went, how easy is this? And then when we got to a point of we had a rum wash, and it was like, where's the yields? We did the maths wrong or something, because we produced fuck all.
The first wash we got good yields. The second one, we discovered that it wasn't as easy as we thought.
Yeah.
The yields were way down, and it was just hard work.
It's a numbers game. Yeah.
So what is the actual mash sorry, as someone who is an entire rum novice, what's the mash process for using molasses? You don't just add a bit of hot water and
molasses
and call it a wash.
Got it.
Yeah,
It's a little bit stir it around a bit.
You might add a few things like DAP, diammonium phosphate, and you might add something to reduce the pH to where the yeast likes to work. And we've traditionally added actual real limes and lemons and oranges to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Okay. Is that to adjust pH, or is it just
adjust the pH down to about 4.8 and also give it a nice sort of fruity citrus note.
Right. Yeah.
And it worked, but it's a pain.
The diammonium phosphate, that's for nutrients for the
yeast.
The yeast,
Yeah.
Okay. We
But
weren't
to
using any nutrients either.
There's no shortage of nutrients for yeast in molasses. There's plenty of them.
Yeah. We were like you, Smitty. We during summer it's too hot to make whiskey, so that's why we started switching into rum. Haven't done a lot, and we refilled whiskey casks. And we tasted it not so long ago, and it's a very it's a second filled cask, but it's a very light rum. It's definitely not a heavy, rich rum. It's definitely nothing like this. So there's a lot of magic and black art around making rum, I reckon. And I know.
Do you find that it matures longer to get a good rum, or compared to whiskey?
Well, we've had some rums that sat around in bourbon barrels for 7 or 8 years and just tasted pretty ordinary. And the reason they tasted ordinary is because they had high funk levels.
Right.
We've had other rums sitting in American oak and port barrels that just came along beautifully in a couple of years, and we forgot about them. And by the time we got around to bottling that, for example, the Ferret you're drinking, that was an 8-year-old rum, I think, and it was just lovely. There's not much that time won't fix.
Do you remember the conference in Adelaide 4 years ago, 5 years ago, something like that? And there was a guy there who ran a masterclass. It was called the Rum Geek, and I remember him standing up in front of us, giving us the tastings of rums around the world and talking about rum styles. And I remember him saying, "You guys in Australia, you just need to make dirty rum and go into those wine casks, and you'll do well."
Yeah, I tried following up that bloke. He wasn't particularly good at communication there after I.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
Is that because of too much rum?
Yeah, I think too much. Yeah. He just dropped off the planet, didn't he?
he did. Yeah.
Yes.
So I've just moved on to the American Westward rum cask,
Yeah.
Oh, I haven't tried it again. Yeah.
which is a very nice use of an ex-rum cask, if I do say so. I'm quite a fan of this one. We had our Epic in the Valley, and that got quite a workout overnight.
That was a camp that we had a while ago.
Yeah, I remember reading about it. Yeah.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun with that. Yeah.
And polish off a lot.
So that's a rum cask, and you talked about using you wanted to use rum casks to put whiskey in. So let's talk about your cask. Let's talk about what do you do with your casks? You know, what do you look for in casks? And the second question is, are you concerned about shortage of casks and what's happening on the Australian landscape right now?
Second one first, I'm not at all concerned about that.
Right.
And that become obvious when you see what we do as the answer to your first question. We use all sorts of casks. We're trying to work out what's good and what's bad. A year or two back, we filled way too many wine casks. I got a fantastic deal on Shiraz casks, and we filled too many of them, and they just turned too tannic and over-extracted in terms of colour and over-extracted in terms of flavour. And we were stuffed. We didn't know what we were going to do with that. We thought we'd just wasted a shitload of whiskey. But we mixed some smoky whiskey we'd done with it, and it came out really nice. We've got a product called a Solera, which is peated Shiraz. And because we're in Adelaide and everyone here's had their palates buggered by drinking way too much Barossa Shiraz, 4 out of 5 people really love this Solera because it's got a bit of smoke, it's got a bit of red wine, a bit of tannin influence, and that's getting more subdued as it gets older, so it's becoming really pleasant. And a bloke called Andrew Durbridge, you probably know, really was quite partial to that one. But Jim Murray wasn't. Once again, he's a European. He doesn't like strong flavours.
Right.
So back to what we're looking for in casks. We're looking for casks that don't leak. We're looking for casks that don't cost too much. We're looking for casks that don't have any mould in them, that sort of stuff. We season a lot of our casks. We did some backyard experimentation. We know that if you empty a cask after 3 or 4 or 5 years, it weighs about 5 kilos more than when you started. And by taking dry casks and putting sherry and port in them, we discovered that they put on 3 or 4 or 5 kilos quite quickly. In fact, they put on 4 or 4.5 kilos in the space of 2 months. So we then discovered that when a cask had whiskey in it, and maybe it was a port cask to start with, and it's had whiskey in it for 1 or 2 fills, we'll then take the cask and we'll fill it full of port for 2 or 3 months. We have actually filled them for 2 or 3 years seasoning, so it rejuvenates them. We've also been known to knock the heads off and re-char them and scrape them ourselves. That's quite fun. Have you ever done that?
Yes, I did it under Burnsy's supervision. I've never done it myself. I think getting a headwood out is pretty straightforward. I think getting a headwood back in, that's a different challenge.
Yeah, you got to put the hoop back on before you char it. So anyway, we've scraped and charred them, and we've seasoned barrels. And the real secret to getting whiskey out, I mean, a lot of people think you can put whiskey in a barrel, shove it in the corner, and leave it there for 10 years, come back and it'll be marvellous. And that's just not the way it is.
No.
1 out of 10 barrels you can do that to, and it comes back a gold medal winner. 1 out of 10 you can do that to, and it just tastes like real rubbish. You can't drink it. And the other 8 is somewhere in between. So the real secret to getting your whiskey out the door younger is to mix and match and blend. And a bit of a cooking background helps here. And Vic is a chef by trade, and he's got a pretty well-defined palate, and he's very good at mixing and matching. I've made him go back and change them 40 times to get the right blend. He just, every morning at 9 o'clock, on my desk is 3 or 4 whiskies to taste. Yeah. And I do that, and I say, oh, that's pretty good, but I think it needs a bit more of that or a bit more of this, and he goes off quite happily and plays with it. But because he's putting that effort into making a blend, we get a whiskey out the door that's acceptable, reasonably good quality in 2 to 3 years. And that makes a big difference to your bottom line and your cash flow.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you. 100% agree with what you're saying about the blending side of it too. And I'll give you a really good example. And I'll send a sample down to you. So we had 2 barrels. One was a Shiraz barrel from South Australia, and it was an award-winning Shiraz. And it was one of my very first casks doing independent bottling. So I got this cask, and the winemaker gave it to me and said, look after it, and I was like, fantastic. And I said, right, now I'm going to go and char it. And he goes, don't do that. You'll destroy all the great flavors of the wine. So I went, okay, I won't char it. So that's 1 barrel, right, which sat on the shelf. Year 1, new makey. Year 2, new makey. Year 3, new makey, starting to change. Year 4, starting to get some flavor. But it was so light and there just wasn't a lot there. And you would not release it as a Shiraz cask release, right? Then I had another cask, and this one was charred, right? And this one just didn't like the whiskey that it was producing, and it had a real Chinese takeaway black bean sauce thing going on. Is the best way to describe it, right? It was really umami and meaty, just very meaty.
But at number 32,
number 32, yeah. Oh, number 30. Yeah, no, don't do that.
Is that the menu item at the Chinese restaurant? Or something?
Yeah. We were just going down that line. We're about to go into a Monty Python sketch, and we better stop. But what we found on the bench, and Todd and I did this because we had 2 casks, and we go, don't like this one and don't like this one, right? But playing around on the bench, the marriage of the 2 has made an exceptionally good whiskey, and it's one of our most popular cellar door releases. And not only that, it's the same new make that I sourced from a distillery, and but two barrels, 2 totally different. And it just shows you that the whole blending side of it. We started blending very early in the piece, and it's a different skill set, isn't it? And you said cooking. You're absolutely right. It's like cooking.
It's the most fun you can have with your feet dry and your pants on. Standing up anyway. It's a lot of fun. It's very satisfying, and we had that.
Well, it's definitely satisfying when you get it right, but there's a few shockers in between.
Yeah, we had last weekend. We just couldn't get it, and So we've worked out.
You don't blend while you're trying to do a mash in at the same time, because the aromas in the shed are just a bit too much.
Yeah. It sort of takes over a bit. No, what I was lost my train of thought. What I was going to say was that that blending side of it, it's so important. But the other thing for me, which was a massive learning, and no one taught me this, is you taste something in the barrel and it tastes a certain way. You separate it from the wood, put it in a receiver, it tastes different than what it tastes in the barrel. And then when you break it down, it tastes different again. And then when you put it in the bottle that first week, it tastes different again. So when you're looking at something on the shelf and you taste something and go, oh, I think this is ready, or I want to release it, in your mind, you've sort of got to work out what it's going to taste like as the finished product in the bottle. Do you find that? Is that your experience?
Yeah, and what's more, it tastes different in different places. So if we have a blend made up in the distillery, we think it tastes pretty good, we'll take a sample home, put our feet up and have a taste there and see, because it usually tastes different, usually better. And we've got a small network of people we give it to bounce it off, because you can develop a thing called cellar palate. You start to like your own booze so much that you don't notice when it's going bad. And we benchmark with other people's whiskies. We benchmark against Scottish whiskies. I've always got a bottle of Flurio on the shelf because we make sure everything we make tastes better than that. I'll point out that Gareth's got one of ours on his shelf and he does the same thing. But benchmarking and tasting it in different environments, and we've also noticed that whenever we've bottled something, quite often we'll come back to it 6 months later. We think, geez, is that the same whiskey? It tastes better. We've not had one taste worse. They've always tasted better. So what the winemakers call bottle shock may be a real thing.
Yeah, I would agree. Absolutely. And we've had experiences where we've pulled something out of the cask and we've started to break it down. And then we've gone, we screwed the pooch on that one. We went too far. And then
I've never heard that before.
Wow. Wow.
There you go.
I got one on Smitty. He doesn't know that one.
I literally had to write down the most fun you can have with your pants on or your feet wet.
No, feet dry. Feet dry.
I'm going to put that on a fucking t-shirt.
Anyway, we didn't screw the pooch because it bounced back.
Yeah.
And but that was a learning early in the piece for me as well. And Todd, wasn't that Todd?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And but there's always something you can do with bad whiskey to make it better.
Yeah.
I like your thing about using an outside group of people to try your stuff as well, because we also find we're our own worst critics. So we're very hard on our stuff, on our product, and it's quite nice to send it out to the world and get some honest feedback. And
you've got to be careful there too, because when you're giving
away we still hold the final say, but it's quite good to get the group we use. We call it the Assembled. They give us honest feedback. If it's rubbish, they'll tell us so.
Yeah, it's important to do that.
It's people in the industry, people outside the industry, and no distillers, and there's 11 of them. And so we'll throw a sample out and bounce ideas off them and just get some independent feedback, because you're in your own shed with your own thoughts and your own booze, and sometimes you need other people's input.
Yep,
for sure. Yeah. What's your biggest learning, and what's your biggest fuck up?
Biggest fuck up was having Tony Fitzgerald as a partner in the first business.
Right.
And probably that was my biggest learning too, Be confident with your partners. That was just a disaster. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I probably learned there is a place in the world for baseball bats. Yeah.
So no love lost then.
No, there's
No
years on. So you get a knock on the door, and it's a guy with a suitcase, with a briefcase from Diageo, from Distilled Ventures, and he goes, "I like what you're doing. We want you to come and join us. What do you do?"
Say thanks. That'd be nice. Be nice for a couple of reasons. Because we started doing this as a hobby business, almost out of spare time and pocket money. We've never had the cash to do things properly.
Yeah.
We've always been really creative at finding less expensive ways to conquer a problem. For example, when we didn't have chilling and our mashes are getting a bit hot and the temperatures are going up at 35, 36, our solution finished up being that we would save 60 or 80 litres out of a wash, put it in the chest freezer and freeze it, make big ice blocks. So the next time we did a wash, we'd chuck the big ice blocks in.
I remember you telling me,
That is a creative solution.
So, but we've never had any money, and we've never been able to make as much whiskey as we wanted to because we keep running out of money. We were too dumb to get into gin because we had other jobs. The other jobs paid the bills. We should have chucked them in and started making gin. So if Distilled Ventures came along and said, "Here's a whole bunch of money, we want to help you get bigger," I'd say, "Yes, please, I'd come along for the ride," because although I'd lose a piece of control maybe or reduce my percentage of the shareholding, my actual shareholding would go up, my value would go up. So I'd have a smaller piece of a bigger pie.
Yeah,
so
I get you.
Finish up worth more. Half a multi-million-dollar business is worth more than a complete $10 business.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and what you could learn from them would be just out of this world for a bloke like me who's self-taught. So I'd say, yes, please, come talk to me. Yeah.
Alternatively, ScoMo drops in one day with his press entourage and hands you a check for $4.5 million. What do you do with it?
Do what Lark's supposedly going to do with it and replace all your equipment and, modernise. That was a grant for machinery modernisation or something, or manufacturing modernisation grant. So we would upgrade a lot of our equipment with that. We might even spend a bit on marketing too. Yeah,
that grant went back something like 12 months or something, didn't it? It was put in quite some time ago.
Mm-hmm.
So it was.
So it's an election promise.
No, it's got nothing to do with
just announced at the election.
It's
not going political.
It's a photo opportunity that. Yeah.
Well,
okay. Anyway, that's
you can't knock Lark for getting a grant.
No.
Well played. Well played.
Yeah, no one's knocking Lark for that.
Yeah.
It's just the way
ScoMo.
Yeah, it's the framing.
It's the framing.
Call me a socialist lefty, and
no, I just call you a cynic.
That too.
So what would you do if Distilled Ventures did come in and said, "Here's a bucket of cash. We're going to take you away. We're going to show you distilleries around the world, operations, look for synergies, etc., etc." And they go, "What would you do as far as your whiskey differently? Where would you want to go with it? Would you
your rum?
Or your rum? Sorry,
I actually like the whiskey we make. Maybe I just make more of it and continue doing what we're doing, because I think we make pretty good whiskey, and it's a style of whiskey which may not appeal to everybody, but we like it, and luckily enough, our customers like it. But something we make a noise about is that we don't try to make consistent whiskey. We just try to make consistently good whiskey, because we get bored drinking the same stuff all the time. And funnily enough, we are making more and more smoky whiskies lately, which is, I know I said that smoke covers a multitude of sins and covers up bad whiskey, but we actually like it, and it turns out we're reasonably good at it. So we'd probably make a bit more smoky whiskey and try to carve a niche as Australia's answer to Ardbeg, if you like.
So is that smoked or peated? What's your definition of smoke?
Well, peated means, to me, it's smoked using peat, whereas smoked may be peat or it may be something else. It could be Peter Bignell using sheep shit, or it could be us using our mallee root smoke, or a mixture.
Right. Okay.
Could be a mixture.
Tell me about the mallee root.
What do you want to know?
What is it?
It's top secret.
It's the root of a mallee?
Mallee tree. Yeah, it's a stump, actually. The roots go underground. The stump is... You ever seen a mallee tree?
No. I may have. I don't know what it is.
All around Western Victoria, South Australia and Western Australia, the mallee trees are the ones that grow by the side of the road. They're about 4 or 5 metres tall, and they've got lots of small trunks coming up out of the ground, out of the stump. And the wood is really, really hard, highly prized by wood turners, and it makes fantastic firewood, because you chuck a mallee stump on a fire at 10 o'clock at night and it's still burning at 6 o'clock in the morning. It's hard.
So from a whiskey standpoint, the smoke that it imparts, is it a campfire smoke you're getting in the whiskey, or
more like an ashtray?
More like an ashtray.
Yeah. But we're also doing some
of an octomore. It's like a cocky shat in an ashtray and poured it on a hot tar road.
Say that again slowly.
It's like a cocky shat in an ashtray and poured it on a hot tar road.
That'll screw the pooch.
Yeah, okay.
So sometimes I wonder how you function.
Yeah.
No. I said that in the shed one day, And Kathy, Todd's wife, heard me say it. I said, sometimes I wonder how I function.
Booze.
That's an amazing insight from you, Crafty.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, we thought so too, because the rest of us thought that for quite some time.
Yeah.
But having said we do a lot of smoking, it's actually quite hard. We use the lark method where you take an existing malt, you spray a bit of moisture on it, and then expose it to smoke. And it's not as effective as using green malt, the way the Scots do it. So you have to work really hard to get the smoke into the drink.
Yeah. Have you ever had the phenols measured on your smoke levels?
No, never done it.
Be interesting. Now, hang on, Nick Hope just put up something. Bring that back.
Bogan burnout. No, not that good.
That I'll tell you my experience of Bogan burnout. Right, so I was at the Oak Barrel, and I was there dropping something off, and there was the table of tasters, and there was a plastic 4-liter vessel full of Bogan burnout, and Josh said, "Oh, this has just arrived," and he said, "Do you want to taste it?" And I went, "Oh yeah, it's from Pete, but, interesting." Pop the top, right, and I went, "Fuck!" The aromas just came out of the vessel, right, and I went, "I'm not touching that. I want to drink something else before I drink that, because I won't taste anything for a week after I had that." I went to the other side of the room, and I was doing this. I was going, I could taste it, and I hadn't even drunk the shit. It's
a bit like sucking on an exhaust pipe of a car.
It is like nothing else. And when Peter sees people drink it, he's just got a big smile on his face because he loves the reaction from people.
The answer to that question, are we recycling our peated tails in the next batch? Yes, we are.
And why wouldn't you?
Well, it's just, even as it fades out, it becomes just another little bit of interesting complexity, because we often, when we're putting a whiskey together and I think it's lacking a bit, we'll just add a little wee bit of smoke, and you can't taste it, but it's like adding salt to a meal when you cook it. If you add salt to food when you cook it, it brings out the flavours. If you add salt after it's on the plate, it just tastes like salt. So a little bit of smoke adds complexity and a layer of mystique, if you like, to your whiskey. So we're quite happy to leave the smoke in the faints, because it just comes through with the next one just a little bit different.
100% agree. It's like it adds some back structure. It's just something in very, very small amounts, as you said. It's like salt and pepper. It's just it adds another dimension.
Bit of seasoning. We
had a crack at smoked malt, Ian, but we took a different approach. So last year I got wood shavings from Youngie's cooperage floor. So wine wood, port wood, sherry wood. They use it to smoked meats. So I went and talked to Voyager Craft Malt Stu and said, "Can we smoke some malt with this?" And he goes, "Yep, we can do that." So sent a bag over a couple 100 kilos of wood shavings over to the malt house. They smoked it for us. When we mashed in, it was just an aroma of bacon and biscuit would be the best way to describe smoked bacon and biscuit. It was wonderful.
It was divine.
And sorry, Todd.
It was divine. It was
divine, absolutely divine. But by the time we, with the low wines that was coming through, by the time we did the spirit run, it just dissipated. There wasn't a lot there, so we weren't getting a lot of anchorage of phenols. So we're now, as of I think next week, doing another batch, and we're going to smoke it longer. But one thing we did not so long ago, Todd and I, is we tasted what we put in the barrel from the first batch, and it's only 6 months old, Todd, or was it a year old? I can't remember.
It's not quite a year old. I think it's about 10 months.
About 10 months. I'll tell you what, it is delicious, absolutely delicious. And you'd release it as a whiskey. You'd release it as a whiskey. It was, there's no chocolate malts or anything like that in it. It was just Latrobe, 100% Latrobe, and just smoked it. And it's very, very interesting. So I'm quite fascinated. So we're going to do it again, and it'll be a style that we're going to develop over time.
Do yourself a favour and get Voyager to overdo the smoke.
Yes.
Because if you have something that tastes a bit like an Octomore, that's fine. You just use it as a sauce with your other whiskies.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if it's so stinking peaty that you can't drink it, like it's Bogan Burnout. If you just add a little weeny bit to your other whiskies, it will lift the other whiskies, and you'll use it as a sauce rather than as a whiskey. And the other thing we discovered is that if you use really active barrels like fresh port barrels and so on, then after about 12 or 18 months, it just gobbles up the peat and it disappears.
Yeah.
That's why all these Scottish peated whiskies are really pale. It's because they leave them in dead barrels. So that harks back to our earlier question about barrels and what do we do with them. We don't get rid of our dead barrels. We use them. We use them for our Solera, and we use them for aging peated whiskies in.
Yeah, right. Okay. That's
even dead barrels contribute, because if you're using a fresh port barrel or fresh red wine barrel, it can often extract so much flavour and colour straight away that if you left it in the barrel for 2 years, it'd be overcooked. So we might put it in a fresh barrel for 6 to 12 months, then take it out and put it in a dead barrel, because the dead barrel still matures the whiskey. It just doesn't contribute or subtract in terms of flavour or colour.
And it keeps the clock running too. So that's a really good point. We found one of our learnings is one of the mash bills that we have, the I Am mash bill, and that's what you've tasted, the I Am whiskies. Chocolate malt features quite heavily in that mash bill. Chocolate malt is a lot like peat. It dissipates very, very quickly. And we've tweaked the recipe over the years. So what we're producing now is very, very different than what we were originally. But it was a big learning that specialty malts, particularly as you go heavier towards a chalk malt or a black malt, those flavors, they become integrated. They don't stand on their own. So it's exactly like peat. If you love your peated whiskies, go for young peats. Don't go for 18-year-old peated whiskies.
Yeah, we haven't done a lot with chocolate malts. I think we've only done 1 or 2 experiments with it. But you don't get such a good yield, and I'm pretty keen on yield, because all that hard work, I want to get alcohol out the other end.
Yeah.
The Scots reckon they get 415 or 20 lows to the ton of grain. We've managed over 400 twice, and I actually think I made a mistake in my calculations, but I wasn't going to go back and check it because I liked about a brain that had 400 lows. I know you're scratching to get 300. So
yes, scratching to get 300. Yes,
well,
but happy.
Once.
Say again.
We got 400 twice actually. But as I said, I think I stuffed it up. We might have had more grain than we thought we had.
So how did you celebrate those occasions?
Oh, with a whiskey. I might have had a rum and coke actually. I can't remember.
So what gives you the shits, apart from the relationship with former business owners? What gives you the shits about our industry?
About our industry? Not much.
Yeah?
Yeah, not much, no. I get peeved sometime when I know that, for example, you enter a competition and you don't even get a medal, and you see people who win silvers and golds and you know their whiskey's not as good as yours. That peeves me, but not for long, because I know it swings and roundabouts. We probably have on the right side of that equation more often than the wrong. But that doesn't peeve me for very long or peeve me very much. So not much really, no.
What about, do you get people knocking on your door and saying, Obi-Wan, teach me the way, right? And they want to know everything that you do, but they want it in one bite where they can take it away and just start up themselves, as opposed to engage in a relationship and learn over time, or even do some basic learnings themselves. Does that give you the shits?
No, not really. The only bloke who's really done that is Paul Shand, and it was my pleasure to look at
Jandy the Bludger.
nah. He's a lovely bloke. He really is a true gentleman, and it was my pleasure. In fact, I tried to talk him out of it. He wanted to become a distiller, and I said, "Don't be silly. Stay in your high-paid scientific professor's job and become an independent bottler." But he chucked it all in and became a distiller, and he's turned out really good at it in his own way. Back to things that peeve me. It's when you're doing whiskey shows and the drunks won't go away. That peeves me.
Yeah.
Yep.
We'll experience that.
Yeah. They just stand there talking to you and you don't want to talk to them. You want them to go away.
Go away. Go buy my stuff.
At the Queensland Expo, you went and I went, Smitty, 3 years ago, I think it was the last one. And right at the end of it, some guy who'd had too much just fell over and fell onto my sign, my hang-up sign, pull-up sign, bent the fucking pole, right? Then got up again. Yeah, it's been bent ever since. And he just looked at it and went, "Thanks," and walked away.
Yeah. Was that the show where I was telling the drunks to go and visit Tim Duckett?
Tim Duckett. Yeah.
I was saying to the drunks, "Oh, you like this whiskey? Yeah, I'll tell you that, bloke. You see that bald-headed bugger over there in the waistcoat? He makes really good whiskey. Just go over there and taste his whiskey and say, 'Jesus, Tim, this is good whiskey. Nearly as good as that stuff from South Australia.'" And that just annoyed the living daylights out of Tim. A, he was dealing with drunks, and B, they were telling him that my whiskey was better.
Before that ever tasted.
Yeah. That opens up the subject. Let's talk about the friendly rivalry between the Tasmanians and the mainlanders, right? So Tasmania is the spiritual home of Australian whiskey, and yes, a lot of things happened and opened up a lot of opportunities on the world stage. But the mainlanders are kicking it big time and giving the Tasmanians a real run for their money. What do you think of the relationship? And what do you think about mainlanders and what mainlanders are doing as far as whiskey in general?
I don't have a problem with the Tasmanians. I think they do a good job, and they've led the way, and they've paved the way for the rest of us to follow in their footsteps.
Yeah.
I think some of their whiskies aren't as good as some of the mainland whiskies, but conversely, some of the mainland ones aren't as good as the Tasmanian. So I think the quality right around the country is pretty good, and it's getting better all the time.
Yeah.
I do think the Tasmanians charge unreasonable amounts of money for their whiskey, or maybe I'm just jealous because I can't get it. I don't know, but they work on the supply and demand thing. People are prepared to pay it, so they're prepared to charge it. And I suppose sooner or later things will normalise and their prices will come down a bit, and maybe ours will go up a bit. But good luck to them. But I think it just makes it easier to sell our whiskey if theirs is too expensive.
Yeah,
I can't afford to buy Tasmanian whiskey. I've got a bottle of Overeem home, and the only way I've got that was to swap it with Jane, with one of mine, because I can't afford to buy it. There's a rumour out there that distillers are wealthy. It's just not true.
No. You don't think it's going to make a lot of money.
The gin makers might, but the whiskey makers don't. Yeah. So I don't have a problem with the Tasmanians.
I'm not sure whether she would agree.
Who's
I
on?
didn't hear that.
Oh, Ellie from Karoo. What's she got to say?
Well, she said actually earlier on that she's got a bottle of the Requiem
Songva.
Songva.
Yeah.
Songva.
Thank you for making it.
Thank you, Ellie. I'm pleased you think it's nice.
So, how many stills have you got? So this is specifically a pot still rum.
Yep. We've got 3 pot stills.
3 pot stills, right.
Yep. We've got a little 80-litre one that we handmade, which we just use for test recipes. We've got a 500 or 600-litre one we made ourselves, which we use for gin these days when we get around to making gin, which isn't very often. And we've got a 2,200-litre pot still we bought from Mark Burns.
Mm-hmm. Burnsy, one of our sponsors.
Is
Oh,
he?
we
Have sponsors.
need to talk about our sponsors. Yeah, we got sponsors, Ian.
Yeah, really?
Yeah.
Burns sponsored you.
We're sponsored.
In fact, let's bring it up now.
Yeah.
It's a good.
People give us money for this shit.
I don't know about next year when they come back and do a performance review and go.
I hope they do. Yeah, these are our sponsors.
Especially when half of them say, "Don't call us,
We'll call you." Yeah.
Yeah. I think the only ones that actually want your business are barrel brokers, most certainly.
Robbie Tugnock. Yeah. Put
Robbie
your orders
wants
in with Robbie.
business. Yeah, put your orders in with Robbie. He definitely wants your business. CCL, Saberglass, and Wild Wogan.
Oh, I don't even know about Wild Wogan.
Oh, really?
Adrian's under the pump.
What is running out of water?
I tried to get a tanker of water this week, and he goes, "Mate, I can't do it. I'm backed out. So don't call us. We'll call you."
Yeah, right. So we're running out of shit. Well, look, I actually put that down to our influence.
We've got his brand out there.
We've got the brand out there for Wogan. Certainly Young. I mean, Youngie was an unknown.
Oh, Youngie was a complete unknown before us.
No one knew him. I mean, Burns. I mean, who's that?
Who's Burnsy?
No one knows Burns.
No
I mean,
idea.
Transwood as well. No. So I think we've had a positive influence on their business.
But the question is, will they sponsor us next year?
Fuck, I hope so.
We've got to buy beer coasters. Did you see all our beer coasters at the Whiskey Awards, Smitty?
No.
Oh, yes,
maybe
you
I
did.
did. I don't know.
We went down with 1,000. We came back with 100.
Awards, you mean?
Oh, sorry.
On the Shandy's bar.
Yes, I did see those. Yeah,
Yeah.
I did see those.
They were like pigeon shit. They were everywhere.
Yeah, they were also flung all around Ginpalooza.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Frisbee and those things.
Back to your sponsors' logos. Was that brown one with the bloke in the skirt? Was that Andrew Young's? Was it?
Yeah,
that's Andrew Young's logo.
That's Youngie's skirt.
Yeah, the legs look familiar, actually. Yeah,
And the body shape.
yeah.
I like to think that it's a kilt.
Kilt, skirt, same thing.
Yeah.
Why would you wear one?
I reckon you can just imagine Youngie there wearing his kilt, nothing underneath it, just like hammering away at a barrel and then flaming it. Just
Ben's over to pick up a chisel.
And does he watch the show?
And on that note,
does Burnsy?
No,
Nah, I don't think so. I tried to get Burnsy on from a stillmaker's perspective, and we will at some stage. But yeah, talk to me in 2023, 2024, because he's just crazy busy.
Absolutely hammered.
Yeah.
Yep. But we have had Transwood on.
Yes.
That was
Laurie and Dave from Transwood Cooperage in Tasmania. Had a great session with them. That was cool. Yeah.
See, I always get so mind fucked when I see Perth, Tasmania. It doesn't compute.
It's two different places.
They are two different places,
but not in Tasmania.
But they're both there. He's in Tasmania in a place called Perth in Tasmania. That just fucks my brain.
There's a place called Perth in Scotland too.
Yes, there is. Yeah.
Fuck's sake.
So when are you going back to Scotland?
I don't know. I liked it there. I enjoyed it. The last time I was there, I went and visited Ian McWilliam at Glenfarclas.
Oh, yeah. Nice. Yeah.
Whenever he's in Australia, he says, if you're ever in Scotland, come and look me up. So I did, and we got the Rolls Royce treatment. It was fantastic. Nice. We'd organised to meet him, and funnily enough, we pulled into the car park, and this little Ford Fiesta pulled up next to us, and out gets Jared from Starwood. Said, what are you doing here? And we did the royal tour. We went through the place, every nut, every bolt, every pipe. Nice. And then we went to the barrel room and we tasted barrels from the 90s, the 80s, the 70s, the 60s. Two from the 50s, including one from 56, my birth year, and one from 1953. and they're all fresh, beautiful, lively barrels.
Wow.
Spectacular. Undoubtedly one of the highlights of my life that day. Yeah.
Oh, that'll be fun.
I had a similar experience at Glendronach.
Yep.
I knew someone who worked ex-Brook Laddie, who then joined the Glen Glassy, Ben Reich and Glendronach group, and he organised. He couldn't be there, but he organised that I got the VIP treatment. Oh, geez, I walked down on wobbly legs that day, I'll tell you. And the stuff that I was drinking was just unbelievable. And Scottish hospitality, absolutely. Yeah, I'm looking forward to. I don't know. Next year, I want to go to the US. I've got reasons to go to the US, and I'd love to go to Ireland. I'd love to go to Waterford Distillery, and to go back to Scotland. But this time, I've done Speyside and I've done Isla. I want to go to Campbelltown. I'd love to go to Campbelltown.
I went to Isla and I got lost.
Yes.
You didn't have the right guide.
No, I went to, there's 3 of them near Port Ellen.
Yeah.
Ardbeg, Lagavulin and Lafroig. I lost Ardbeg.
Well, you couldn't smell it?
No. Did you meet George Campbell when you were at the conference, Crafty?
No, I didn't.
George Campbell now works with my son on Kangaroo Island at KI Spirits.
All right.
Yeah. He used to be operations manager at Glenfiddich.
Right.
And turns out he's planning a trip back to Scotland next year or the year after, and he's invited me to go along with him. Turns out he's got a family member at half the distilleries in Scotland because he comes from Vermont. That's where he was born.
All right.
So you really need to make his acquaintance if you're going back to Scotland.
Yeah.
He's got a family
like a really good friend to have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I'm always keen to meet new people in the industry.
Just a little brag.
A little brag. Yeah.
A little brag. I'm not sure whether it'll translate to the camera.
Glen, go down a bit.
So that's a bottle of
Glenlivet
vintage.
Vintage. Yeah.
Bottled distilled 68, bottled 98.
Yep.
What is it? Have you got it?
I will.
Serious?
Yeah.
Wow.
So we're going to have a little taster of that magic at some point. It's 52.7%. A little taster of that magic in the next few months.
Wow. Just because it's old doesn't mean it's good. I recall my experience at Lagavulin. Yeah, it'll be good. At Lagavulin. So it was masterclass in the barrel house, and they were rolling out different barrels, drawing from the barrel, filling up the glasses, and we were all tasting it. And they started with, it was like a 12-year-old, then it was an 18-year-old, then it was a 25-year-old, and they were all fantastic whiskies. And then they rolled out, I think it was like a 45-year-old.
Oh. And
we were all absolutely salivating and put it in the glass. And there was about 20 of us in the barrel house. And we all at the same time just nosed it and started tasting it. And we all looked at each other because it was absolute shit. And we were all looking at each other and going, what's going on? We don't understand. And they did it on purpose. And they said, this is to show you that just because something's old doesn't mean it's good. This thing had overripe massively and it was just not good. They said, don't be fooled by age. So I always remember that. That was one of my learnings when I went to Lagavulin.
Yeah.
Cool experience.
I'm a member of the Stray Whiskey Club here in Adelaide.
Yeah.
And they do annual dinners at a place called Robe. And we have crayfish for lunch and we have bucket list whiskies afterwards. And one year we had what we think was a 75-year-old Glenfarclas.
Right.
It turned out that one of the lads' cousin brought it out from Scotland, and his uncle had worked at Glenfarclas for 40 years. And when he was retiring, they said, Jimmy, would you like a watch? And he said, stick your watch up your ass. I want that barrel. And they gave him the barrel. Which you know how they have allotments, garden lots and sheds. So he put it in his garden shed. And we think he'd been retired for 30 or 35 years.
Yeah.
So we're guessing it was 40-year-old when he took it home, and we're guessing it was 75 years old. And it was, we collectively agreed that it was like, what's the name of that female English actor who used to be in the Avengers? Joanna Lumley.
Yeah.
Past its prime, but really classy nonetheless. Well, Joanna's past its prime, but she's definitely classy. And that's what 75-year-old whiskey was like. Yeah. We were privileged to have it.
I think that's a good way to wrap it up. I think it's a good way to wrap it up, Ian. I don't think there's anywhere to go beyond that, actually.
It could be unattractive. All right. Well, thank you for having me around. It was a pleasure. It was a hoot.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks, my friend. I appreciate you coming on board.
Oh, shit, sorry.
Appreciate you coming on board.
Sorry, again.
Get rid of it.
Anyway.
Any final words, Smitty? Anything you want to say to our massive audience, which is growing each day?
Growing every day, at least one
by one.
I'll put in a good word with you for Burns. I'm having dinner with him Tuesday night.
Oh, yeah?
So I'll
when you do, when you see Burnsy say, "Has he made my fitting for cleaning my hoses?" He knows what I'm talking about.
Probably about the same place as mine. All right, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, everyone, for listening and watching and all the things. Please like and subscribe. I need to do the things. Like and subscribe. If you can leave us a review on iTunes, Apple Podcasts. I don't know whether you can review on Spotify. I don't think. If you can, do it. I don't use it. The more of that, the absolute better. Thank you very much, Ian. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Ian's website.
Fuck yes.
Ian, we're going to put your website up on, mate, so people know where you are.
What? Fuck. Shit.
So www.
Just talk amongst yourself.
Just oozing out.
Where is it?
Shit.
Where is it?
Shit.
No, that's your porn site. What, you got your porn site?
Stop it.
Get rid of it.
I can't.
Man, if your wife sees that, you're in trouble.
No, love it. Love it. Say,
where is it?
She'd say, go for it, because whatever.
that's another discussion for another podcast.
Is that the right one?
Is that right, Ian? Tinsheddistilling.com.au?
That's it. That's correct. Yeah.
Cool. Good recovery. Good recovery.
Jesus shit.
Lucky you didn't put in Florio or something like that, because that would have been terrible.
Lucky I didn't put in Pornhub.
I heard enough. See you, boys.
And on that note,
see you, Ian.
See
you
around.
Yeah, guys.
Good evening. Thank you all. Cheers.
Good night.
How do we get out of this thing?